Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Go Earn It podcast. And today, I would have never thought I'd been able to speak to this guy. He's been, it's surreal actually just seeing him on the screen right now. Let me maximize it real quick. Perfect. He is Luke Thomas of the Luke Thomas Radio Show, MMA analyst, reporter. He's a man of many hats. So Luke, for starters, I'm sorry I have a lot of nerves right now just because
don't worry about it.
It's pretty cool being able to talk to a guy like you because I'll tell my listeners right now, I've been watching and listening to Luke since like 2010, 2009 maybe even, back when he was on like Spike TV and doing some analyst stuff for Bellator and whatnot, and now to see him doing his own thing and growing as much as he has been, it's been cool to watch. So, Luke, thank you for being on the show.
And, well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So, Luke, for listeners that don't know who you are, sorry for the little nervousness. I had to break through that wall just to calm my nerves down. But for listeners that don't know who you are, could you give them a brief description on what you do as far as MMA goes?
Yeah, well, it's changed over the years, to your point. I've certainly worn a few different hats. But as it stands today, basic way to understand it is I host 3 different shows.
Yep.
I have 2 different employers. So one employer is Vox Media, and with them I host 2 different shows. One is on Monday. It's called the MMA Hour. It's interview guests, do a little analysis, talk about some of the big topics in MMA. And then on Thursday with that job, I do like a round table with other media members. Right. And then for SiriusXM, 5 days a week, I do a radio show on Channel 93, which is what you would imagine a sports radio show. Centrally devoted to entertainment as well, so that's what I do.
So, Luke, if you can tell me, where did the love and aspiration being involved with MMA come from? Because it's such a new sport to the average fan nowadays that back in the 90s and early 2000s, MMA was kind of a barbaric, not so much popular sport to the public mainstream. So for you, what got you into it?
It's a combination of things. I guess the simple answer would be, as a kid, I think a lot of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s were, martial arts cinema is just not as big as it used to be.
Right.
But back when I was a kid, and I'm not sure how old you are, but
25.
Yeah, so you're a little bit younger than me,
yeah.
but I grew up in the era of the Van Dammes and the Rambos and the Schwarzeneggers, and some of that's just action, but
right.
But it was a big thing, and I remember my parents were split up, and I would spend my summers with my father, and he had a family friend who was taught martial arts, and he's like, you got to see this Brazilian guy, and I'm not one of these guys who saw it when it first came out. In fact, I think the first 4 had already happened, or at least the first 4 were available at the local Blockbuster. So we rented 4 first, UFC 4, and then worked our way backwards. And, everyone's like, you just can't imagine what you're seeing.
Right.
And I kind of kept up with it over time, but less so as I went through college and whatnot. And then I got out, and I was trying to become a professional. And certainly I had no ambitions at all, to be quite candid with you. But one thing led to another, and just as hobbies, I had started various sites, and all of them had failed pretty spectacularly. But each one was a learning experience about how to do things a little bit better. And by the time I had an opportunity to host, or I should say, run an MMA one, which eventually became Bloody Elbow.
Yeah.
It was just the right place at the right time. It was the first thing I'd ever done where things worked.
Right.
And it escalated and escalated and escalated to the point where I was like, can I do this for a living? And here we are.
Yeah, it's crazy because I remember, especially for like you guys like you, Ariel Hawani, Ben Folks, you guys were honestly doing this job back 10 years ago that was just more or less a glorified hobby per se for you guys. Nowadays, it's like everybody wants to be an MMA analyst and they're a reporter and whatnot. So for you, what's it like seeing that landscape, just saturate over time?
You mean on the media side?
Yeah, on the media side, because, everybody, for example, myself, everybody wants to have a podcast. Everybody wants to have a radio show, YouTube channel. So for you, you were one of those, not to toot your own horn, but you were just one of those public figures back in the day that was doing the same job you are today. It's just now it's more glorified.
Yeah. I would say generally I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
It creates for some competition. But also it's like, how do I say this exactly? It's there aren't that many jobs where like a full-on mainstream entity is going to hire you. There are some,
Right.
but turnover is slow. It's
Sure.
like it's like the Supreme Court. You gotta wait for someone to die basically before another one comes up. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So I really kind of like the whole independent. MMA started as like an internet movement, to be quite
For
honest with
sure.
you. It really grew up together,
Yeah.
and I think keeping those roots alive, and it gives you access to people. Like to your point, everyone wants to be an MMA analyst. Well, there are so few jobs on, again, as a mainstream outlet, but if you really dig around, man, you can find some really talented people doing some interesting work. And
Yeah.
so that's a hard way to make a living too,
Right.
but at least it gives you access to creative driven people. And so I'd say on balance, I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, like, I've been a big fan of MMA in general for the last 10, 15 years, and I grew up wrestling, playing football. I wrestled in college, and, it translated right into after wrestling, especially for NCAA, Division I athletes. They're not even Division II, III, no matter what, in college wrestling, that afterthought of, oh, crap, what do I do after this is over? It crosses a lot of athletes' minds, and so it's weird to see how it translates so well into how mixed martial arts come, because look at the crop of UFC fighters today. If not most of them, at one point were all coming from college backgrounds in wrestling, right? So it's just interesting to see a guy like myself get to see it all unfold, and then in 50 years from now we're going to be talking about how like this just grew up and blew up like the internet, like you just said.
Yeah, and look, not everyone's going to be there at the end either. Like,
Right.
People some weed out, but I just feel like, I mean, think about it. Even before we ever got into it, like back then, there was how many TV channels? 4 or 5 TV channels.
Yeah.
They controlled access to everything, and now
Right.
they don't. So if you've really got a good attitude and you're willing to see things over the long term, and you've got some creative ideas, and you really work on your craft, you can do some pretty interesting things.
For sure. So Luke, back in your early 20s and whatnot, you trained mixed martial arts, and you actually were ready to getting into an actual MMA bout. Is that correct?
Sort of. That's how somebody reported it, but it's not quite right. The way I would explain it
Yeah.
is as follows. I got out of the military. I was bored.
Right.
And didn't know what to do, and I had just sort of done a random Google search. I was like, "Is there any gyms around me? Like, what am I gonna do?" And there was one 3 miles away, and I was like, "Oh my god!" So okay, so I went and tried it out, and what I found out was like, I had no expectations one way or the other.
Sure.
About it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see what it was like, and at the same time that I loved it, I also would see the competitive students, and there was 2 things that sort of stood out to me. Was one, they liked training. Don't get me wrong, I liked training,
Right.
but they were obsessed with it, and that was all they did. Some of those guys just, I mean, I would come there, they would already be there, I would leave, they would stay, and I was like, I don't have a commitment like that.
Yeah.
I don't care about that much. But what I did care about was they would go and compete, and I'd be like, well, where are the results? And I couldn't find any. I was like, man, how is that possible? Like, there's no results for this kind of thing. And sort of just got me into beginning to talk about it online. I was like, this is more my speed. I don't have it in me to be what that is.
Right.
I don't mind being in there and training with them.
Sure.
But I don't want to do what that is. I just don't care about it in that kind of way.
Yeah. And then looking back at it now, are you glad you didn't pursue it more than you did? Because I mean, you as an analyst, a reporter, whatever you want to call yourself, you've seen over the last 8 to 10 years the true damage it takes a fighter to go through, but also sustain over those years and years of time and training. And it's not about what they do inside the cage; it's that training outside the cage that is more or less the harmful, after effects of what happens in an MMA fighter's career.
Yeah, I actually haven't been in a real MMA gym in a while. The one my shoulder's banged up, but
Yeah.
when that's not an issue, I just go to a one that mostly focuses on jiu-jitsu. But
Right.
back then, I remember this was 04, 05.
Okay.
You were still getting that, the way to get better is just to bang it out
Right.
every day.
Spar
kind of
every
mentality.
Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Hard.
Yeah.
Hard.
I know, and it's sad. I know guys that are doing that now. And it's just because.
Yeah, well, it's less of a problem now, but it still exists, right?
Right.
And back then, that was thought to be the best way,
Yeah,
nearly a
exactly.
way. And so, what I would say is, I don't regret any of my time spent on those mats, and I
Yeah,
never do, because it has really helped me stand apart from some of my peers in terms of, I don't present myself to be anything more than I am, but I at least
sure.
have some understanding of what I'm looking at,
Mm-hmm.
and that can only come one way. I've always told people, like, how do you learn more? And I'm like, well, books. I have some books on stuff that can
Yeah,
help. You can go buy John Danaher's Back Attack series, that will help, but really, those can only complement getting in there on the mats.
actually
And you don't
training
have
it.
to be,
Yeah,
yeah, you don't have to be Cale Sanderson. You don't have to be Anderson Silva.
right.
But you got to get out there and learn and try and see and feel, and then everything else can add around it. And so, in terms of helping me at my professional job,
Yeah,
it's been awesome. But I don't
right.
regret not taking it any further. No, I don't like. And on the jiu-jitsu side of things, you've seen it. You go like these IBJJF tournaments, and there are people. It's like they're an accountant for a living, and
Oh yeah,
I don't want to bag on them. It's like that's how they want to see their life on the weekends. They want to
right.
win
Yep.
tournaments. It's not what I care about at all. Could
Yeah.
not interest me less,
Yeah, I actually we partnered up with Grappling Industries. I don't know if you've heard of them yet.
Yep.
They're an up and coming promotional event that a little different than all styles of the jiu-jitsu, leagues that are going on now. But it's crazy to see how many people that are involved in in a sport like jiu-jitsu, that no matter what the age is, you'll find all sorts of different kinds of people from different backgrounds, and it's interesting to see the camaraderie. Like, it's almost like wrestling, but more respectful, because when two wrestlers get on the mat, they're gonna bang it out, and when it's all said and done, there's a winner and loser. In jiu-jitsu, what I've learned as of recently is, win or lose, they get off the mat, they're still talking about their moves and whatnot, and that's unheard of from my side of the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So, someone made a point to me once. They were like, "You ever seen this is true for fighting. You ever seen two fighters just absolutely have a war, and no one wins in terms of a stoppage? Bell rings on the end of the third or whatever, fifth round.
Yeah.
And they'll embrace, they'll hug.
Right.
It's like, you will never see that in college wrestling.
No.
Ever. They barely shake hands.
Yeah.
They'll like touch hands like a little bit, just enough so that just keep a degree of civility there.
Yeah.
And I kind of respect that.
Right.
It's not that I would want jiu-jitsu to be like that, but I'm glad that there's a difference between them, if that makes sense.
For sure. So, Luke, I wanted to touch up on some of the previous guests I've had on the podcast. One, I'll first start off with is Jose Shorty Torres. What are your thoughts on how his career path has turned completely upside down due to I don't know what it's called in UFC, a hiccup maybe with the flyweight division? What are your thoughts on a guy like Jose?
Man, it's funny. I remember he put out that post on social media being like, "Oh, they've let me go because they said I was coming off of a loss and blah blah blah."
Yeah.
And so we actually had him on the show that day.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, really well for us. So we got him on, and here's the thing that's sort of weird about it. It was like, if the UFC was going to get rid of flyweight, which is a 125-pound division for some of your listeners don't know, which is the lowest weighted men's division currently in the UFC, because they still have the division. But the whole talk was, oh, we're going to get rid of it. Okay, well, we can debate the merits of that. But if you're going to get rid of it, get rid of it. What I don't understand is getting rid of some of the guys, even if they're coming off of a loss in the way that Shorty Torres was, who still has long-term promise.
He's so young.
So young. He was a two-weight champ in Titan FC.
Yeah.
And I know that his UFC start did not get off to a John Jones-esque bang.
Right.
But okay, he's still young. He's still pretty good.
Right.
If you're going to cut the guys, cut the guys.
Right.
But if you're not, or you're going to well, now we don't know what we want to do, and maybe we'll keep some around. That doesn't seem like the guy you want to let go of, at least on a long-term play. So
right.
I frankly am just confused by what they want to do with this division at this point, and how keeping him out makes any sense.
Do you foresee it being that in 2019 you'll see the flyweight division disappear and that 165-pound division they've been talking about here and there pop up, or do you think that that's still a long ways to go from what we see in the future?
If you had asked me that question a couple of months ago, I'd have been like, absolutely they're going to get rid of 125 and absolutely they're going to add 165. And my hunch is that they probably still will. But it's just so murky these days because Dana White's like, we'll see what happens with 125, and no, I'm adamant against 165. But when you've got guys like Connor, Kevin Lee, Nurmagomedov, Tony Ferguson, Ben Askren, all these guys saying, 165 would be awesome. Dustin Poirier saying that.
Max Holloway.
Max Holloway. All these guys want all of these staggered divisions.
Yeah.
To the point where you're like, how can they resist that pressure over time? So what I
Right.
would say is, I don't know what's going to happen with 125. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
I do think 165 is headed our way.
For sure. And the next guy I wanted to talk about real quickly was Ed Ruth.
Wow.
One of my favorite guys to watch, not only in wrestling but in MMA, because his transition straight into MMA and how successful he's been the last 2 years. What did you think about the loss he took over the weekend in Hawaii?
Surprised.
Yeah.
Surprised. Not that I'm surprised that if you play around with Neiman Gracie long enough.
Oh yeah.
Things are going to happen.
Right.
Here's the point I would like to make to people: if you only know Ed Ruth from MMA, you don't really understand him at all.
Not at all.
I mean, you're talking about top 10 collegiate wrestler all time.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the best collegiate wrestlers ever.
Hands down.
An amazing athlete, dominant force on the mats, just athletic, could scramble, every,
Right.
mat wrestle, the whole bit, he could do it all. And his transition to MMA has been a little bit bumpier than I expected it to be,
Right.
but he's still really new. I think there's a lot of time for him to develop. So what I would say is, I think you used the word before, hiccup.
Yeah.
You call it a hiccup. I think strategically, just not going to the mat with a guy like that probably would have been a lot better, or just not trying to pass, just, maybe take him down, but then really in safe positions and get right back up, just to keep the stand-up a little bit more unpredictable. And so, to me, just some experience issues that I think once he irons out, I still have high hopes for him.
Yeah, would you say that it was a little too early for him to enter that Bellator tournament? Or in hindsight, probably it's always in hindsight, but what do you think? Because I feel like they did at first. They slowed his pace at the level of competition he was fighting, and then they're like, "All right, you got a couple wins, off to the races you go."
Right. Yeah. At the time, I thought it was perfect.
Yeah.
In retrospect, it looks like there's still probably some seasoning that needs to happen.
For sure.
But again, it's like I always make this point. When Demetrius Johnson got into the UFC, he got beat by Brad Pickett.
Yeah.
People didn't even know. Yeah, he was a good fighter, but how good was he going to be?
Yeah.
Well, he ended up being arguably the best ever.
Right.
Not everybody peaks in MMA at the same time. Obviously, he didn't have the same background that Ed Ruth did, but I guess my only point is I'm not ready to throw in the towel on Ed Ruth's future at all.
No, not at all.
A little bit more work. We'll see what happens, but I still believe in him.
Another guy I wanted to cover real quickly. Also, he's a funny buddy. I love when I visited him back in January. Kevin Ferguson Jr., Baby Slice. Yeah. What do you think of a guy like that? Because his background in MMA is very, very beginner level. They brought in. That's no disrespect on Kevin. It's just the facts. Kevin got brought up by looking up to his dad, who is this YouTube sensation street fighter. What do you see from a guy like Kevin Ferguson Jr.?
He's got some work to do. I think
yeah.
A very fair way to describe it, but that's such a long shadow that he's living in, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Kimbo, you could say whatever you want about his fighting abilities, but just as a promotional attraction, can't miss. Like every time he was out there, he was setting records. And to be that guy's son, and to physically resemble him in the face and the way that he does,
it's crazy.
It can't be easy, man. It can't. It's really hard, and I think he probably feels the pressure to get out there before maybe he's ready, and the promotion probably wants to see what's really there. And so the good news for him is that if he had been signed, let's say, off the Contender Series or the UFC, there would be nowhere to go. It'd be just killer after killer after killer. In Bellator, he can get the right kind of developmental treatment. I think he's still with Antonio McKee.
Yep, still training with AJ and them.
So one of the best trainers in the whole game, super underrated. So let's see what happens. It's not been the most amazing beginning, but he's facing unique pressures that nobody else is.
Yeah, and one last guest to ask about your thoughts on is Ricardo Lamas. A couple months ago, I spoke with Ricardo. He was kind of in limbo. The UFC wasn't really making any offers about any potential fights, and then finally he dominated Darren Elkins weeks ago, and What are your thoughts on his future in 2019? He's an older veteran in the sport. He's been around since WEC, and for listeners that don't know, WEC, that's coming around a long time ago. In my years, per se, watching guys like him, Uriah Faber, Cup Swanson, and now he's that seasoned veteran. What do you see in his outlook for 2019?
He might have another title shot left in him.
Yeah.
Because that loss to Josh Emmett was real bad, the knockout loss, but it was like a last minute. We've seen how last minute opponents can throw off even the best of guys.
Yep.
To your point, he got a nice win in a return fight against Darren Elkins. He took Max Holloway the distance. He took Jose Aldo the distance.
Yeah.
And so, am I saying he's like on the verge of a title shot right now? No.
Right.
He probably has another win or two, but to the point, I don't think he's ever that far out of it. He's a very tough guy. Super well-rounded, and this is the point I was making about Ed Ruth or somebody like that. Ricardo Lamas is a very good wrestler, but he's not the wrestler Ed Ruth is. However, he has really worked on his overall game, and B, he just makes smart decisions about where should this fight take place to benefit me.
Right.
And I think that will carry you really, really far beyond what your normal athleticism or your normal background skill set might. So I think that Ricardo Lamas might be a name to keep an eye on here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wish him the best, but at the same time, that window of success in UFC is so small that sometimes it's you never know when it's the end for a fighter. So
that said, real quickly though, he doesn't show. He's a little bit older. I think he's like 36.
Yeah.
He doesn't look a 36.
Right,
he doesn't
right.
look super slowed down.
Right.
Maybe the other guys just have more advanced skill sets, like a Max Holloway.
Sure.
But he's not out of it yet.
Yeah, definitely not. And I don't mean like he's a gatekeeper or anything like that. But, once that guy hits that sweet age of, 34, 35, 36, it's probably time to consider, retirement, in those last couple of years.
That's when the clock really starts ticking.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple more minutes with you, Luke. Once again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. What are your thoughts on this John Jones Gustafsson rematch coming up in a couple weeks? For listeners, I know most of us that are wrestling followers, fans, they know who John Jones is, and so the ups and downs of his career has really, for me, a personal fan, I've been never so disappointed in a guy like that because I looked up to him just in general as a fighter, a role model, and every time he slipped up, it was like it kept getting worse and worse. So as far as a redemption story for John Jones in 2019, do you foresee that happening, or is it possible that we see, a demise somewhere down the road for John?
Man, what $1 million question that is, right? It's part of the reason why this fight's so exciting.
Yeah.
The first fight was arguably the best championship fight in light heavyweight history.
You had John winning that fight?
I did, but here's the thing. It's like any close fight. The way the scoring system is set up, it's like if it goes one way or the other when it's that close,
right?
You just can't get mad at it, man. You just
roll
can't,
the dice.
So if you had it for Gustafsson or any of your listeners did, I won't argue with you.
Right.
I can't. It's just you see what you see.
You can't argue that it wasn't a close fight. I mean,
100% close fight.
Yeah.
But also, Gustafsson put it on him early, and then John had it late. So what do you make of that, right? So in any event, what an amazing contest. It's so funny. It's like John's actually somehow been more active than Gustafsson since that time.
Right.
Even with all the layoff, John hasn't put his body through hell. He looked amazing in the second fight against Cormier. For me, and this is a hunch. I have no inside information other than a hunch. My hunch is that the way to take advantage of John was back then, when he strategically didn't know all the right choices to make, but he had this amazing athletic and there's a recklessness about him.
Right.
Now he doesn't. Now he's much more sharp and focused, and he makes really, really, really smart tactical decisions. Love him or hate him, you got to respect it.
For sure.
To me, the question is, how much does Gustafsson box him up? There's one piece of kryptonite people don't really realize if you look at the numbers on John. He suffers the most when people are active and accurate boxers against him. Let's see if Gustafsson can do that the second time around. And
the surprising part about Gustafsson that most people, especially myself, found that was crazy was Gustafsson took him down not once but twice. It's like George St. Pierre, right? Right. That's unheard of, against a guy like John Jones. For listeners that don't know the John Jones story before MMA, this dude was supposed to get a full ride and wrestle possibly be a future multiple-time NCAA champ. Now, that's all hearsay now, but people underestimate the wrestling on that guy. And if he wanted to, really, most of those opponents he's had in the past, he probably could have easily double leg, take them to their back, elbows all day, to most of the opponents. So, Luke, with that being said, what do you see out of the college wrestling atmosphere now that excites you in terms of, the field of MMA? Because what I've noticed with, and not to cut you off, but, with social media and the hype of it now, you're seeing, wrestling be covered again. Like I just saw that Penn State wrestler that did that flying squirrel that made ESPN SportsCenter. It's crazy that, not even less than 5 years ago, we were talking about saving wrestling in the Olympics. Yeah. And now it's mainstream as far as social media and the growth that it's taken off. What do you see coming out that will relate to MMA in your aspect?
This is a good conversation to have because remember how we started it talking about in the media side of things, these
right.
opportunities to podcast on your own.
Yeah.
There's a lot of underserved sports communities that didn't have access to the major, ESPN is like they'll cover the national championships every year. And
that's the only thing,
Right. That's the only part.
Right.
And so there was these communities being like, what do we do? And then you get Flow Wrestling, and then you get Twitter and Instagram, and you can begin to coalesce around these things where there are no gatekeepers. If you exist and you want to get together, nobody can stop you.
Right.
And so you're beginning to see that there's a strengthening process as a consequence. Just the other day, I don't even have cable. I have YouTube TV, the online one.
Sure, yeah.
And I watched the Arizona State Penn State dual meet, and it was amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like right there. So I would say I've not kept up with the names this season. I'll be candid with you, but that's not true. I watched Penn State because it's kind of like appointment viewing. I don't even like them.
Well, I think out of all the MMA analysts and reporters I follow and listen to, you have been out of everybody. You've been the one that shined light on NCAA wrestling. I would say because
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I saw Dake versus Taylor for the second time in college, maybe the first time at the NWCA at American University.
Now, if you're an MMA fan, you don't understand the magnitude of that. But if you're a wrestling fan, hands down, everybody knows what you're talking about.
It was amazing. It was in the electric atmosphere, crazy. And Dake won that, barely, but Dake won that. So here's what I would say. The only thing is, to your point, there's so much more of a spotlight now because people have set up inside wrestling ways to get the story out better.
Right.
And the wrestling is phenomenal. I think folk style is probably the best style for MMA, to be quite honest with you.
Interesting.
But the only thing that concerns me is back when Daniel Cormier got into it, right? All those guys from the 2000 Olympic team.
Yeah, that's who I was just about to bring up. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. When all those guys got into it, it was like, what are we going to do? We can't get a coaching job at Wisconsin, so I guess go into MMA. And now what you're seeing is the wrestling world, which is a good thing, has responded by making sure that those guys who are super, super elite level, they get taken care of. That a David Taylor, when he wins a world title, he gets financially taken care of. And that's a good thing. I'm not mad at that. But it makes some interesting questions for MMA. It's like you would have gotten the Cormiers before. Are you going to get them now? So don't misunderstand me. You can get a guy who's a good D3, D2, or a good All-American D1. They're still probably going to come over. But that top segment, I wonder what's going to happen with them.
Yeah, the reason why I bring that up because of the name you brought up, DC, Daniel Cormier. He's training with some guys. I've had one on my podcast, Kyle Crutchmer, up-and-comer Oklahoma State wrestler. He's a bad man when it comes to stepping on not only the mat but inside a cage. And Deron Wynn and those guys, I'm excited to see what DC, because it's crazy. DC's a wrestling coach. People don't understand, on top of all the other roles he has, on top of being an MMA fighter, not only that, an MMA two-time champion, he is a wrestling coach at heart. And so it's crazy to see the wrestling translation into MMA. It's, two peas in a pod, basically. As far as work ethic goes and everything else that wrestling applies, same thing applies in MMA. Would you agree?
It really does. Yeah, well, it does. I think it's Gilroy High School.
Yep, Gilroy.
But at the same time, Cormier is trying to play that too. Like, he recruited Deron Wynn.
Yeah.
But he told Jordan Burroughs, stay in wrestling.
Right.
You in wrestling. So it's a bit of a push-pull there where you're trying to figure out where can this athlete maximize themselves.
Sure.
Given the unbelievable ability of Jordan Burroughs and the history that he was potentially able to make, they wanted him to stay in wrestling. And Deron Winn's a tremendous, tremendous wrestler. I don't mean to undermine him,
Right.
but not everyone's Jordan Burroughs. And Deron Winn might be able to make a lot of good money. He just went through Tom Lawler. And
Yeah, what'd you think about that fight?
I thought it was crazy because if you looked at it, you're like, oh, well, what's so impressive about Deron Winn? Yo, Tom Lawler is a good fighter.
A seasoned veteran.
Seasoned veteran. By the way, wrestled himself as well. He's not like some scrub. He knows how to wrestle.
Right.
And Deron Winn, I'm not going to say walked the room, but did really well. If you're beating guys like that in your 5th fight, look out.
His stature is almost like a Cormier, short, stocky. He doesn't show that he has a huge muscular body, but as far as the way he has power, it's kind of crazy. Luke, 2 more questions, and I'll get you out of here. Once again, thank you for your time. First question, do you ever I knew you commentated back in like 2011 for a couple of years. Has that crossed your mind? Because I would imagine you got a great voice, and the way you can analyze and communicate just on a level of just listening to you. Has it crossed your mind to ever go back into that?
If a promotion wanted to hire me in that kind of capacity, I would at least consider it.
Right.
But I'll be candid with you. I think that what you're seeing more and more of, and I'm not mad at it, but you're seeing more and more former fighters do it.
Right.
Especially at the highest level, and that's probably okay. Like, especially if it means steady income for some of these guys.
Sure.
I've sort of resigned myself to the fact that I don't know what my future holds, but I'm going to focus my efforts on my analyst work and being online and taking advantage of the mediums that I can control. It's so hard to say when someone else is in charge. I can't tell you what's going to happen.
Right. I get you.
I can't say what I'm going to do about it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to focus on that.
Luke, where can listeners find you, follow you? Time for you to give your plugs.
Let's just do it on Instagram. Luke Thomas News on Instagram. There's
For
links
sure.
there. You'll see all my stuff promoted there. You can't miss it there. And I'm trying to get some followers there. So we're gonna send this out and make sure that we get a couple of followers for you. Luke, my last question, as I always sign out and close out the podcast. Luke Thomas, when somebody says you have to go earn it, what does those 3 words, go earn it, mean to you? It means one of the best pieces of advice, which falls right in line with that, is that maybe it was Edison who said this: genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It's like you can have a great idea. Lots of people have great ideas, truly.
Right.
But you have to go out there and make it happen. You have to just pull the yoke like an oxen in the field. And sometimes you have to do it when you're tired.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to do it when you don't feel like it. And sometimes you have to do it when you absolutely hate it. But if you are driven to something and you are committed to something, there is one way to get there. It is not around the fire. It is not over the fire. It is not under the fire. It is through it.
Fire. Luke, thank you so much, man. I'll tell you what, like I said, I'm a big fan of yours. And for you to be humble and gracious enough just to come on with a big name like yours, it means everything to me. So thank you very much, man.
Yeah, a pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me, and good luck with the business. And
thank you. I'll be sure. I didn't tell you yet, but we got another gear package coming. I hope 2X is good for you.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly, actually.
Perfect.
Great.
Sweet. All right. Thank you, Luke, for your time, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, buddy.
See you later.